You know, you never know what you're going to get into in EAA's Air Venture Oshkosh. I'm Dan Grider reporting for AVweb. We're looking at the bomb bay of a Lancaster bomber. The Lancaster was used with the B-17 in World War II. And in a minute, we're going to go outside the airplane and talk to a Lancaster pilot.
The Lancaster ended up being a night bomber, so they would do the night bomber offensive. B-17 and the B-24 were used during the daytime. So they had a 24-hour operation going. The airplane now weighs about 37,000 pounds empty. The normal bomb load would be 14,000 pounds. It did have the capability with some mods to carry a 22,000 pound bomb. The normal wartime crew on the airplane was a single pilot, a bomb aimer who would also use the front guns, a flight engineer who looked after the operation of the systems and could assist the pilot quite often with power settings. It had a navigator, a radio operator, a mid-upper gunner, and a tail gunner. The average life of a Lancaster in operations was 21 missions. This airplane is equipped with air brakes. It has a number of air storage bottles in the right wing at the wheel well. It has an air pump on the number 3 engine and another air pump on the number 4 engine. And the expander tubes are similar to tubes in tires or bicycles with brake pucks around the outside of them. And when you squeeze the little handle, the air goes out of the bottles through a valve on the rudder pedals and down to the wheel brakes and puts the brakes on. And if you want differential braking, it comes off the position of the rudder pedals. And then when you release the brake, the whole thing is sort of done in reverse except the air is ported overboard. Why don't we go take a look at the cockpit in the Lancaster? Normally on takeoff we never use full power in this airplane, but if we wanted to use full power we would have to go through the gates and pull this little red handle down. So normally we take off with about 1,200 horsepower out of the 1,600 horsepower per engine that's available. Cruising speed normally on this airplane, depending on the weight, is around 180 knots. Takeoff speed is anywhere between 95 and 105 knots, depending on the weight and the wind conditions. Landing speed on it, we like to come across the end of the runway at about 100 knots, normally touch down around 90 knots. Actually, during the war they would probably have the most trouble on, well, they had them on both, but mostly on landing. You normally try and do a wheel landing with the airplane, and if there's a crosswind or there's a contaminated runway, then they got into trouble.
More than 7,000 Lancasters were built. About 4,000 of them were lost in the war, and if you were a pilot, 60% of the pilots never came home from the war. Of all the Lancasters that were ever built, there's only 2 left flying in the world, and one of them is right here at Oshkosh. For AVweb, I'm Dan Grider.